introduce our first speaker, who will then speak for 10 minutes, and then I'll repeat that process going forward. We should have a few minutes remaining for audience questions at the end. We do have a hard stop time, this being a congressional room. I don't think they'll frog march us out, but I don't want to run the risk. So we'll just begin with Daniel Tobin. He is a member of the China Studies faculty at the National Intelligence University in Bethesda, Maryland. He has served as a China specialist in the Department of Defense since 2004, most recently a senior analyst at the United States Indo-Pacific Command's China Strategic Focus Group. Dan, if you would take it.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me. Oh, thank you, that's better. Thanks for inviting me, and because I do work for a university that's part of the Department of Defense, I have to start with the disclaimer that any statements of fact or opinion that I offer are purely my own and should not be construed as that of the National Intelligence University, the Department of Defense, any of its components, or the US government. So I want to use my quick 10 to 12 minutes to attack three cliches that I think are quite prevalent among specialists and non-specialists working on China about the Communist Party of China's goals and international ambitions. And I think that all three of these cliches should have been decisively put to bed by Xi Jinping's dramatic speech to the 19th Party Congress in 2017, where he described China's ambitions as becoming a global leader in terms of comprehensive national power and international influence by mid-century. But my research is on party history and the history of the Communist Party of China's ideology, and I would argue that contrary to what is often described in Washington as Xi Jinping sort of taking a wrong turn and leading Chinese politics in a new direction, I think that what he has articulated is very much in line with what the party has talked about over its history if you look at its authoritative documents. So what are the three cliches? So first, I would urge all China specialists to stop saying that the party's highest goal is simply to maintain its hold on power. That's one of the most prominent cliches you hear, kind of this defensive idea that they're just trying to keep a lid on their domestic problems. If you look at what they have written themselves over time, and as many have noted, they're about to celebrate their 70th anniversary of ruling the country in a few days. What they say they've been doing is they've been seeking to turn the backward, weak country they inherited into a modern, powerful socialist country that restores China's place as a leading country in the world that they lost during the 19th century. And more than that, they've been pursuing that goal by long-term planning and target setting in particular areas of modernization that they refine as they go. So when Xi Jinping talks about the goals for mid-century, he's referencing explicitly, look at the footnotes in his books, he's referencing a three-stage modernization plan originally outlined in 1987 and refined a bit since. But although the particular aspects of modernization and the specific targets do change over time, of course Mao didn't call for becoming a cyber power as Xi does. The common denominator is to make China into a leading country across every dimension, as the party now says today. So here what the 19th Party Congress represents is not a departure, but a milestone. So until the 19th Party Congress, from 1981 until 2017, the party described its principal challenge as overcoming China's backwardness. Xi instead declared that in some areas China was now ahead. It's now the #2 economy in the world. Now for the party, this explicitly imposes a new set of complex internal and external challenges based on this new status as the #2 economy and as an undisputable great power, requiring new theories and new policies to guide them from a position of, as they say, catching up with the times to now leading the times. And this change has major implications for US-China rivalry. So the second common myth is that many argue that we're not really in an ideological competition with China because many decades ago, the party traded its faith in Marxist-Leninism for some mixture of economic performance legitimacy and a sprinkling of nationalism. You'll often hear specialists and others say that our competition with China resembles some earlier era of great power competition where it's about economics, it's about military power and technology and diplomatic influence, but it's not really about ideas. Well, this view misses the way in which for the party, what they call the socialist path on the one hand, and the nationalist modernizing project of restoring China's place in the world have been intimately linked from the beginning. And when we talk about socialism in the West, people think of a state-run or state-owned economy. You might think of a European social welfare state. When the Chinese Communist Party talks about socialism, they do so in a very consistent way with a very consistent argument about history, which is that China would not have been able to attain its present status without a Leninist state. They argue that only a Leninist state could have restored China's sovereignty in 1949, could have protected it from slipping back into a victim of imperialism since, and incidentally, that's partly why they argue they need to maintain public ownership of the commanding heights of the economy, because if they privatized completely, other international corporations would come in and China would be subject to foreign powers once again. And finally, they argue that only a strong Leninist state could have marshaled collective effort for development. And furthermore, they say in 1919, democracy and capitalism failed to save China at the Paris Peace Conference when Germany's colonial privileges in China were given to Imperial Japan. So for the party, reform from the 1980s has never meant transitioning to a different system. It's meant perfecting the institutions of its socialist system. They've allowed private ownership alongside public ownership in order to boost the economic base, productive forces in Marxist jargon, but their intention has not been to transition. Far from privately abandoning socialism, they've insisted, even in their darkest hour, amid the wreckage of the failure of Mao's economic policies, that they would ultimately demonstrate superiority of socialism. And here, too, the 19th Party Congress is an important watershed. For decades, the party had simply insisted its socialist system was right for China, given its particular historical conditions. Now the party says that its rise over the last several decades means its system deserves to be an example for others. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean exporting their system through violent revolution, but it does mean that they're ready to insist on equality on the world stage. They argue they've discovered a path to modernity that is distinct from democratic capitalism. And again, the party's effort to tying the socialist path to the project of national rejuvenation, they say that this discovery ought to also boost China's prestige. At the 95th anniversary of the party in 2016, Xi Jinping has a great long passage about how their success should boost international socialism and it should boost China. So for the United States, this means we're in an ideological competition, one that Beijing never abandoned and is now pursuing with greater confidence. Finally, the third point. Many scholars, you'll hear this, you'll see it in foreign affairs today, you'll see it repeated in all sorts of venues, believe that China's international goals do not extend beyond achieving regional predominance, or at most becoming one pole in the multipolar world that the party has long predicted will emerge as U.S. relative power declines, in their view. This view, however, understates both the scope of Beijing's explicitly stated ambitions and how the logic of the first 2 points that I've outlined push China's leaders to try to seek to transform the international order. Now let me spell out what I mean by that. If national rejuvenation means making China a global leader, then Beijing needs not only to obtain security for its political system, you'll often hear the idea that they want to make the world safe for autocracy, but they also need, if they were to attain national rejuvenation, from the international community, they need respect for the achievements of their system. In other words, it's not simply being left alone and not threatened by the United States. It's that they want their system of governance, both domestically and internationally, to be as influential and prestigious as those that the West has popularized. Here, the 19th Party Congress dramatically endorsed Xi's call for a diplomacy befitting China's status as a major country. Xi Jinping's vision of a community with a shared future for humankind imagines a world composed not of U.S. alliances, U.S. alliance structures, but a network of global partnerships linked to a rejuvenated China, which now occupies center stage and which offers an increasingly influential standards on everything from technology to domestic governance. And it's precisely this great power ambition of building influence with which to achieve the reform of the global governance system, and not simply the desire to export excess investment capacity that underpins China's much-touted Belt and Road Initiative. So in sum, I would say the 19th Party Congress heralds a new, more active phase in what Xi Jinping has called a protracted contest over the international order. And for the United States, this is not simply a regional contest, but a global one. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Dan. Our next speaker is Dr. Carlos Ponce, and he's a senior fellow and director of Latin American programs at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Previously, he was director for Latin American programs at Freedom House and the general coordinator of the Latin American and Caribbean Network for Democracy. His career has been dedicated to the strengthening of civil society, developing mechanisms to protect human rights leaders, and strengthening democracies throughout the region. Dr. Ponce.
Thank you very much, and thank VOC for the opportunity to share some ideas with you, in particular with the China soft landing in Latin America. China soft landing in Latin America, it has been something planned by China for a couple of decades, and had an opportunity, tremendous opportunity after September 11, because the U.S. decided to focus the effort and fight against terror, and leaving the countries in Latin America without any support for the new threats that the new regime from Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, and Chavez alliance with Cuba and with China, representing a change in terms of the ideology in the region, but also in the economic patterns of the region. Countries began to explore other opportunities for trade and began to open the door for China to operate in the region. And it's something that happened directly by investing in the region and passing in that couple of decades alone from $12 billion investment in the region to almost $310 billion last year. In particularly investment in commodities, investment in infrastructure, communication, key areas for the Chinese to begin to control the region. The socialist government from Argentina, from Bolivia, from Ecuador at that time, Venezuela, Nicaragua, El Salvador, begins to open the door to China to invest in the region, to take advantage of an open region for investment in soy, minerals, oil, and also China paid back the favor. China gave to Cuba $18 million as a payback for the advocacy for China engagement in the region. And of course, that opened the door a major discussion in the region about the effects of China investment in the region. Some people believe that it's a positive investment because 1.8 million jobs created. Yes, but violating human rights, violating labor rights, and violating the basic condition of labor for those jobs. Some people say that the investment in China is positive. The China investment is positive because it has been generating new business. Yeah, new business for commodities, for raw materials, not for investment in infrastructure, investment in growth in the region. It's a new colonialism operating in the region. Then the other advantage of the supposedly investment in China is building roads. China has been building only the roads necessary to connect the investment of China in those countries. The only investment that China has been investing in this country. And investment also in technology. Yeah, China controls now all the telecommunication sector in Venezuela, part of the telecommunication sector in Nicaragua. Controlling the national telecom industry in Venezuela. So any change in Venezuela will have to deal with a negotiation with China. What I say in every meeting that I have with respect to Venezuela, that right now there are two presidents in Venezuela, one the autocrat, the other one the opposition leader from the Congress that has been acting as an interim president, and the China government. China is the owner right now, probably half of the country, because the country has been giving away to China territory, oil, minerals, and also opportunities to invest in those countries and to reclaim then the favors assigned by the Chinese regime. China also has been investing heavily in oil, gas, mining. Several organizations developed a report last year about the China's presence in Latin America and human rights violations, including each one of the disasters that China has been creating in several countries: environmental destruction, labor rights violating, human rights violated, and how the Chinese regime has been persecuting the communities that have been against the regime in China. China has been trying to fight back against the report promising investment in those communities, buying back the community. China changed the approach from violence in terms of the control of the region for greed. Why I said they changed that for greed? Because China, instead of taking the region by violence, China has been buying the corrupt regimes in each one of the countries with contracts that nobody knows, not approved by any Congress, in managing soft politicians in all these countries and buying these politicians to get control of all these countries. That means violation of human rights, violation of labor rights, violation in environmental control, and there are also the potential problems in the future about the Chinese control of all the technologies. Even countries like Uruguay, small countries like Uruguay, are relying in China right now for security cameras, giving control to China to all the security. They are giving away the technology, they are giving away the security system. And also China has been investing in supporting all of this regime with a mechanism to control civil societies, to control any demonstration. China has been doing that in Nicaragua, China has been doing that in Venezuela, China has been investing also in Bolivia. All these countries, in exchange for China support, has been giving away commodities, has been giving away land, has been giving away all this product. But not only that, China also has been asking those countries to be faithful to China. And China's role at the UN has been changing from an absent China to having now the full support of several countries from Latin America, even major countries like Brazil, and that too much to China to vote against China. Mexico recently has been beginning to vote also in favor of China at the UN level. So China has becoming the great power behind internal governments, controlling those governments, controlling the government of Venezuela, controlling the government of Nicaragua, controlling the government of Bolivia, supporting those governments, and supporting those governments at the international level too in the negotiations with the US. Is China the major actor right now in the negotiations with Venezuela? China is a major actor when some negotiations occur with the case of Nicaragua, or with the case right now with the support that they are providing to Bolivia. China also is the major actor in terms of the financial market. China has been investing in the Inter-American Development Bank, in the Andean Corporation of Finance. The major instrument of investment in the region are controlled now by Chinese capital. What means is that also all the infrastructure projects they have been funding with money from the multilaterals is also China's money that goes beyond all the investment that China has been providing directly. That gives China control also to the regional economic market. The financial market in the region has been becoming a problem because China has been letting so much capital to these structures that they own the development process to China. If China decided one day to take away the investment in the Inter-American Development Bank, it's the last day for the Inter-American Development Bank to operate and to lending the money. They go to negotiations directly in China to know about the process of investment in the region. Same apply with the Andean Corporation of Foment of Finance. That is the other big element of support of the region. So to summarize the position that I have with respect with investment in China, yeah, it looks good. It looks good to have an investment from China. It looks good to have millions of dollars in the region and having the opportunity of exporting soy, of exporting minerals to China, have a new buyer in the region. But the price tag has been elevated, and China is going to get more and more control of the region. And it's just losing a political opportunity for the U.S. and for our partner Taiwan. China has been also forcing several countries from the region to kick off Taiwan from El Salvador, kick off Taiwan from Costa Rica, from Panama, and so on, in exchange with trade and other opportunities for China in those countries. So it's an opportunity also to raise the voice and try to stop this from happening and having major engagement from the U.S. trying to stop China from advancing more in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. The final speaker on the panel, of the last panel of the program, is Dr. Panos Mourdoukoutas. He's a professor and chair of the Department of Economics at LIU Post in New York. He also teaches at Columbia University. His academic research, publishing, public speaking interests include global markets, business, and investment strategy. Dr. Mourdoukoutas, if you would.
Thank you for the invitation. It is a great opportunity to understand China. China is now the world's second largest economy in both cooperation, a collusion course with the United States. And that will determine the future of the global economy. My presentation today is 10 minutes, 10 slides. Hopefully there will be one slide per minute. Now, the question is, I have 3 questions to address. What China is doing in Africa, why they're doing it, and whether it is a win-win situation. Now, what they're doing in Africa, they try to place Africa on the globalization map. Why Africa has not been on the globalization map? Well, it depends on what kind of globalization we talk about. There are 2 models of globalization. The Western model of globalization, or modern model of globalization, driven by markets and private financing, and by governments that have rules, respect for rule of law, transparency, anti-corruption practices. That's the Western model of globalization. Then there is the Chinese model of globalization, whereby it is a 19th century crony capitalism, whereas there's no government rules. Globalization is driven by governmentally owned enterprises, by governmental financing, and there are no rules of engagement. Okay, so that's the globalization. So Africa missed the Western globalization because markets were too small, too diverse for private investors to commit money. And governments, some governments were too corrupt, didn't follow the rules, so Western governments didn't provide the financing. Plus, Western governments, they don't provide the financing, direct financing, the way Chinese banks. Western governments do not own banks. China owns banks. China can order banks to finance whatever Beijing has in its own plans. And the plans are for Africa. So what they're doing? They are building infrastructure. They are building ports, they are building railroads, they are building factories, they are building TV stations. Do African countries need all of this? Of course they do need all of these things. Actually, these things are supposed to have finished a long time from the colonial era, never finished. So China somehow is trying to finish the job. So that's what they're doing. So they're building all kinds of projects in Kenya, all kinds of projects in Ethiopia, and in Eritrea, and so on. Now, the next question is that why China is doing that? What is in for China? Several things. Number one, China needs resources. China's model has been based on two axes. One is exports. Two is infrastructure spending. Both of these axes, both of these motors are slowing down for all kinds of reasons. The export sector is in collusion course with the United States. And I want to elaborate here and make an academic point. The reason China is not the first country that tries an export-driven growth. But unlike other countries, it's a large country. So what we say in basic microeconomics, China is a market maker. So whenever China tries to sell more, it collapses world prices. And that creates tensions. That's why there's such a big tension with the United States. So we don't know what the outcome of the trade war will be. But China must look for other markets. And Africa is another market. Next, China has reached what we call in development economics the Lewis point. After so many years of growth, the reserve army of agriculture has been exhausted. So therefore, there is no wages go up, and China cannot compete with Vietnam and other areas. So therefore, they need cheap labor. Africa has it. Now, China is in a collusion course with America in the Middle East. China needs oil. America and its allies control Middle East oil. So China needs alternative sources. Nigeria, Angola, Sudan. Africa has the oil. Then China is in a collusion course with America in South China Sea. Wants the entire sea, its own sea. And of course there's the issue of Taiwan. So China needs United Nations votes. Africa has many, many countries. And therefore they are there for the votes. Now, go next. So there are multiple benefits from China. And again, China is doing all these projects. And its state construction companies get business. And some of private companies get profits. Now, some of these projects, though, are not viable, economically viable. What I mean by that? In a Western model, in a real market model, an investment project begins with an evaluation what the project will produce and where the project will be viable after it finishes. And the project creates two effects. That's introductory economics. One is the multiplier effect, while the investment takes place, and the other is the accelerator effect. When the investment finishes and now the project operates, there are more benefits. And that makes growth sustainable. That's what every country needs. Guess what? Many of these projects create multiplier effect, but not accelerator effect. In other words, they create jobs while they're constructed, but some of the projects are idle. And this is the model, by the way, which China replicates from its own, from the domestic level. China has many projects, go to the other driver of China's growth, infrastructure spending. China builds. Roads, bridges, airports. It doesn't matter where the malls, doesn't matter whether somebody will go there. While it lasts, it creates jobs. Beautiful. For unions, bureaucrats, for bankers, everybody. The project finished, the mall finished. It doesn't create revenues. It doesn't have tenants. It doesn't create jobs. Done. Actually, I want to make a point, perhaps later on if I get a chance. I think the greatest danger for America is not China's strengths, it's China's weaknesses. Many, many weaknesses. Other countries did this before. Other countries did what China did now. Soviet Union did. Sped, then you have a period of fast growth. Once this project finishes and then do not operate, there's no more growth. Then I go to the third point, because time goes by. The third point is that are these projects win-win for both ends? Of course, China goes to TV, Xi Jinping, and says it's a win-win situation. Who can debate that Africa needs infrastructure? Nobody can debate. And some of these projects are viable, like the train between Mombasa and Nairobi. That train is viable. But other projects are not viable. What does it mean? When they finish, they won't produce sufficient revenue to pay for what? The financing. In this case, the financing comes from Chinese banks with a collateral, either the project itself, like the one airport now in Kenya, or oil. So if the country cannot pay at the end, one more thing. Many of these projects are inflated. So what's the benefit to China? The benefit to China is its construction companies, which are owned by the government, translation, the Communist Party, okay, they get business. They are inflated, which means actually their cost is perhaps half of what it appears to be. Then, if the project fails, they will get oil or they get something else. So China is not losing anything. Gets the votes in the meantime. What does the domestic economy lose? If the project flops, then they have to turn domestic assets to China. It happened, of course, in what happens in Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, of course, is both the case. Both of the ports of Sri Lanka now belong for 100 years to Beijing. So, for domestic, for the African countries, with a few exceptions, some projects are well evaluated, well needed, and perhaps, to be fair, they will be good projects. But other projects, which are not economically viable, they are going to leave the countries, they're going to cut growth. The project will finish, if they're not operational, they won't create further jobs, they won't create further income, and of course they will leave the country indebted to Beijing. We call that, of course, debt diplomacy. Beijing applies somewhere else, applies it now. So that's the new model of China's globalization.